It's a book video. This year I am taking on the Dymocks Reading Challenge. Essentially a series of prompts that encourage you to read more and to also diversify your reading. Today we are going to be talking about January to March, so let's get into it. Okay, so the first prompt that I chose was Local Flavour, which is a book written by an Australian author. I have read so many amazing Australian novels since I've lived here. I've really enjoyed exploring Australian fiction specifically, so I was excited about this one. The book that I chose was So Close to Home by Mick Cummins. It follows the story of an 18-year-old boy called Aaron who is homeless in Melbourne and struggling with an intense drug addiction. He's been kicked out of his house, he roams the streets of Melbourne, and he's just trying to get through day to day, getting his fix, but also trying to survive. And as you can understand, in order to satisfy that addiction, he's having to go to some pretty extreme and dangerous, life-threatening lengths. I'm going to pop a quote in from each of the books as well so that you can get an idea of the writing style. The first rays of a pink-purple dawn fall softly across the top levels of the city's tallest buildings. In the half-light of the street lamp, Aaron rolls up his blanket in the tarpaulin and jams it into his backpack. He stands and slings the pack onto his back to stare out at the day with a cramping stomach and creeping anxiety demanding his attention. It's an expected but always unwelcome reminder of who he is and what lies ahead of him. So of course this one explores some really dark topics and some really important topics. We're looking at themes of homelessness, of drug addiction, of family relationships, of survival. And Mick Cummins does a fantastic job in that he doesn't shy away from the detail. He says it how it is, and it's really captivating when he's talking about those key moments. I did find that at times it was getting quite repetitive or predictable, but then on reflection, I thought, was that the point? Was that the intention, in that Aaron is almost stuck in this cyclical, machinal, like a loop that he can't get out of, and that every day he's just kind of going through the motions. So I think potentially that could have been an intentional technique that Mick Cummins has used. Overall, I gave this one a 3.5. Next prompt that I chose was something very different to my usual go-to genre, and that was a whirlwind romance, which was described as heartwarming for the soul and romantic at heart. And I'm not well versed in the romance world. I haven't read a lot of romance novels, so I took myself to Dymocks, I perused the shelves, and I chose a book by Lynn Painter called Mr. Wrong Number. So it's about the relationship between our two main characters, Olivia and Colin, who end up unknowingly texting each other as a result of a wrong number incident. Colin is Olivia's brother's flatmate / best friend, who typically has spent his life thinking Olivia is incredibly annoying. Olivia then gets herself in a situation where she has to move in with her brother and therefore is living under the same roof as Colin. So we've got an enemies to lovers, we've got forced proximity, and we've got some steam. You aren't a hot mess at all, Livy. You're just this human tornado who is so alive, so filled with the energy of the moment that there occasionally is a little collateral damage. Do you know, considering romance isn't my usual go-to, I really enjoyed reading this. I thought it was so light-hearted, such a fun read, so playful, so lovable. I found myself laughing. I really was invested in the characters. Look, it had its moments that were a little bit cringe. I feel like a romance has to have that in order to be a romance. But it has made me want to read more Lynn Painter. So I think I've over the last few months I think I have like 3 more Lynn Painter books. So she's done something right. I really liked this one. 4 stars out of 5. Okay, the next one that I went for was a TBR hangover cure. So a book that I put on my TBR list last year, but then didn't get around to reading. And for me, that was this book called One Day We're All Going to Die by Elsie Esther Hurst. This one is described on the blurb as a deep dive into the complex questions that surround culture, identity politics, and intergenerational trauma in contemporary Australia. So again, it's an Australian novel and it's set in Melbourne. Our main character is 27-year-old Naomi, and she works at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And she absolutely loves it. She loves her job, she loves her work. And the reason that she loves it so much is because of her own Jewish heritage. So we're introduced to her grandmother, whose name is Cookie, and she is a survivor of the Holocaust. And the book is all about how Naomi navigates her life in her 20s with relationships and work and family drama. But it's all kind of through that lens of her Jewish heritage in conjunction with living in a contemporary Australia. What's a thing of beauty to have traversed the earth on these souls that have borne her weight. Each step taken away from her homeland brought her closer to a life, ripped her away from a death. So again, quite a topical book with a lot of perspectives on culture and history, which I did enjoy reading about. I do think with this one that there was some scope for some more plot development. There was definitely room for a little bit more tension to be created. And I would have loved to have learned some more about Cookie, because I thought she was a really interesting, complex character that we didn't get to see as much of as I would have liked. However, one thing that I loved about this book and that I want all books to do from now on is in the back, there are book club discussion questions. And I think that's amazing. Book clubs are such a fantastic way to engage with the book community, and often, you know, if people are struggling for questions or we're recycling the same kinds of questions, it can be really helpful to have prompts, and these prompts are written in a way that gets you to delve a little bit deeper into the themes of the book. So, for example, what is the role of the museum within the book, and how does the museum serve the book as a backdrop to the action? So it's encouraging some really important conversations, which I really enjoyed. Overall, all things considered, I gave this one a 3. Okay, our next prompt was called Women's Rights. So enjoying a book by a female author. I had so many to choose from, but of course settled on the fantastic Prima Facie by Susie Miller. So if you don't know already, Prima Facie is a play that Susie Miller wrote. It starred Jodie Comer most recently. It's a one-woman play, and essentially it follows the story of a defense lawyer called Tessa. She starts out, the story starts out with her really believing in the legal system, in the justice system, and believing that the system works, and she's so committed to it, she trusts in it. But then she becomes a victim to sexual assault by one of her co-barristers. So she's then on the other side of the system, and she starts to see things very, very differently. The law of sexual assault spins on the wrong axis. A woman's experience of sexual assault does not fit the male-defined system of truth. So it cannot be truth, and therefore there cannot be justice. I already knew a lot about this story. I've read the play, I've performed extracts of the play, I've taught parts of the play, and I wanted to get the novel because I felt that it would allow us to go even deeper. And that's exactly what it did. This book was so powerful. It had so much depth. It was impactful. And I think the most frightening thing is that it's relevant. It feels like Susie Miller is just holding up that mirror to society. she does so in such a sophisticated, articulate, but confronting way. Susie Miller as well is so highly experienced and so well educated. She's educated in science and in law, and she has a doctorate in drama and mathematics, and she also worked in human rights law. And that all comes through in her writing. You can see that breadth of experience. You can see that she knows how to write for an audience and for a reader as well. So 5 stars, would recommend. Of course, just be aware of the trigger warnings that would be in this book. Next up, we have the prompt for travel book. So a book that transports you to another place, time, or culture. For me, this one was a no-brainer, and I went for The Alchemist. I feel like The Alchemist is kind of a rite of passage as a reader. You kind of have to have read The Alchemist because it's one of those that is so popular and so referenced. So it follows the story of a young shepherd called Santiago, and he has a dream of seeing the pyramids. And along the way, he meets all these different people and visits different places and has lots of different experiences that essentially teach him different life lessons along the way. It's all about following your dreams, but also discovering what those dreams are and choosing your path, your own path of life. Before a dream is realized, the soul of the world tests everything that was learned along the way. It does this not because it is evil, but so that we can, in addition to realizing our dreams, master the lessons we've learned as we move toward that dream. That's the point at which most people give up. It's the point at which, as we say in the language of the desert, one dies of thirst just when the palm trees have appeared on the horizon. This book had such gorgeous imagery and symbolism, and the language was metaphorical. It was a really spiritual book, which is what I was expecting. And something that I love about this is that this was first published when Paulo Coelho was 38 years old. And to me, that is so important because I think when you have a passion or a love or something that you want to do, people always say, well, I can't, it's too late. And this just goes to show that this novel was not published until he was 38 years old, and it's gone on to be one of the most well-known successful novels on the planet. I can definitely see why this has gained so much traction and so much popularity, and I can appreciate the messages in it. Would I personally describe it as life-changing? Probably not. However, I can see why it could be. Maybe I've read it at the wrong point. Maybe I should have read this just before I went traveling. But gorgeous language and gorgeous imagery, 4 out of 5. Our next prompt was an aesthetic appetizer. So a book that you got because of its cover. So for the aesthetic appetizer, I went for Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kuang. This has been everywhere. It has been all over the internet and people have loved it. So Yellowface follows the story of June Hayward, who goes by the author name of Juniper Song, and you learn why in the book. Essentially, what she does is she steals her friend Athena's manuscript after she dies, and she finishes it and tweaks it and then publishes it as her own, essentially taking full credit for the book. And it explores themes of cultural appropriation, racism, and it also provides you a really interesting insight into the publishing world. For the first time since I submitted the manuscript, I feel a deep wash of shame. This isn't my history, my heritage. This isn't my community. I'm an outsider basking in their love under false pretenses. It should be Athena sitting here, smiling with these people, signing books and listening to the stories of her elders. So again, the topics in this one are so important and increasingly relevant. I particularly enjoyed the reference to things like Goodreads reviews and how they are interpreted and the importance of them from that author perspective. And it was really interesting to get the cultural aspect in here as well. I have to admit, I was not on board with the way that Athena died. I thought it was absolutely ridiculous. I don't know if because of that it kind of set the tone for me, but something about this book fell flat, which makes me really sad because I went to see Rebecca F. Kuang. She did a talk at the Sydney Opera House during Women's Week, and she is so intelligent and I think one of the most articulate and well-spoken people I have ever seen address an audience or just talk in general. And this is not her usual genre. So I believe one of her most famous books is a fantasy book called Babel. And I haven't read that. So maybe that style is more her thing. But this one something about it fell flat. I felt like it probably could have been about 100 pages shorter. So I gave this one a 3 out of 5. Our 7th book prompt was Stacks on the Beach, so a beachy summer read. For me, there was only one author that kind of fit this, and that was Emily Henry, so I read You and Me on Vacation. This book follows the story of Poppy and Alex, and essentially they're two friends that go on all of these summer holidays together, and it goes right back to their holiday that they had 12 years ago, 11 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and the experiences that they've had during each of these holidays. I'm on vacation. Vacations always end. It's the very fact that it's finite that makes traveling special. You could move to any one of those destinations you loved in small doses, and it wouldn't be the spellbinding, life-altering 7 days you spend there as a guest, letting a place into your heart fully, letting it change you. So, I loved the travel aspect of this book. I loved reading about all the different places that they were going to, describing all the different countries and the experiences. I loved that. I didn't love the story. I'm sorry, I know it's such a popular book and Emily Henry is such a popular author, and that's why I picked it up, because people love her writing and they fall in love with her stories and they fall in love with her characters, and I just didn't. I didn't care for the characters. I felt like it was building up to this big moment to reveal, oh, this is, something that happened in Croatia. It reminds me of what happened in Croatia, is what they kept saying, what the main character Poppy kept saying. So I was thinking, okay, I'll hold out to find out what happened in Croatia. And I just felt like it was quite anticlimactic. And I wanted to love this. So it's really hard to say that I just thought it was fine. Maybe it was just this one. Maybe I need to give another one of Emily Henry's books a go, because people love her. Maybe, again, it's because romance is kind of a new genre for me. I don't know what it was. It was fine. I gave this one a 3. I'm moving swiftly on from that. The final prompt for the January to March Dymocks Reading Challenge that I read was for New Beginnings. And this was a book that I was reading across the entire time, and you'll see why. So New Beginnings was a book to motivate you for the year, or the first series in a book. So I went for a book to motivate me for the year, and it's a self-help book called The Neuroscience of Self-Love: How to Improve Your Most Important Relationship by Alexis Fernandez-Praxer. So this book teaches you the ins and outs of how our brains work and how that then connects to the relationship that we have with ourselves. It explains the role and the influence of things like dopamine, serotonin, cortisol, synapses, neurons, but it's all in a way that is so easily understandable and so easily accessible. It also has really carefully placed exercises throughout the book so that you can put into practice what you're learning, which is another reason why I didn't just go kind of cover to cover. This is the kind of book that you have to take your time with, and you have to do the exercises and process that and then move on to the next section. The brain learns through repetition where to strengthen pathways. If you have a strengthened pathway of a behavior that you don't like, it's not because your brain is being an asshole. It's because that behavior has been repeated enough that your brain then makes the process more efficient for you. Your brain is trying to do you a favor. I loved this book. You can see how much I loved it because of the numerous tabs. I have tabbed the living daylights out of this thing, and I have scribbled in it and I've annotated it and I completed the exercises, and I learnt so much about myself through reading this. I've always had quite a complex relationship with myself in terms of my self-esteem, my confidence, And this is also, it was directly complementing the work that I was doing in cognitive behavioral therapy in terms of understanding why our brain does the things that it does, the evolution of that. I love to learn the why behind things. I love to explore the reasons behind why certain things are happening or why I'm feeling the way that I do. And that's what this book does so well. It really just resonated with me, and the exercises were so helpful. It's also, look how gorgeous she is. So stunning. And it's just one of those books that I would recommend to anyone and everyone. And I just think it's important for everyone to have the knowledge that this book presents. This was amazing. 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, would recommend again and again and again and again. So you know how I was saying that the aim of the Dymocks Reading Challenge is to get you to diversify your reading, but also to read more books? It definitely has done that with me, because on top of the 8 that I read using the prompts from the challenge, I also read 2 extra books, so I'm going to go through those as well because we're doing a little wrap up. First one that I'm going to mention is a classic, and this came as a surprise to me because I'm not as well versed in the classics as I should be or as I would like to be, and I loved this book. So it's actually 2 books. It's The Yellow Wallpaper and Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So The Yellow Wallpaper was published in 1892 and is a 20-page book. And it's all about a woman who has become secluded in a room in her mansion because she is suffering from what we assume is postpartum depression. And her husband locks her in this room, and it's her quote unquote treatment. And it's all about her mental state and what she is going through whilst she's locked in there by herself. And of course, a key aspect of that is how much she hates this putrid yellow wallpaper. I am glad my case is not serious, but these nervous troubles are dreadfully depressing. John does not know how much I really suffer. He knows there is no reason to suffer, and that satisfies him. This was fascinating. It was so interesting, and because it's 20 pages, of course, you just fly through it, but also to pack so much into such a short book was executed perfectly. I loved The Yellow Wallpaper. Go and read it. It's 20 pages, 5 out of 5. So the second story in here was Herland, and that came out in 1915, and it's about these 3 men who come across this island or this society that is completely female only. It's all about them learning their way of life whilst they are questioning the kind of patriarchal society, and they're each wanting to learn why their society runs in that way. As I learned more and more to appreciate what these women had accomplished, the less proud I was of what we, with all our manhood, had done. Are you joking? This literally could have been written this year as far as I'm concerned. The themes are so relevant to today. This was written in 1915, and I was reading it thinking, people need to be reading this now because this is happening now. What I loved is how these 3 men, and they have very different personalities, and one of them is so misogynistic. It's actually like I was gonna say disgusting to read, which it is, but kind of in a good way, in that she portrays him so effectively, and we all know people like that, sadly. It's essentially painting the society that could be if it was female only and what that would look like. And it also provides a really stark reflection on the patriarchal society that was around in 1915, but also that we are still witnessing now. So I loved reading Herland. It was fantastic. 5 out of 5. And last but certainly not least, we have this book called All the Words We Know by Bruce Nash. This book follows the story of an 80-year-old woman called Rose, and she lives in an aged care facility, and she has dementia. And it's all about how she navigates her life in the aged care facility, but she's also quite a skeptical woman. So there's some things that are going on that she's not sure about. Her children that come to visit her, they help her out. They help with her accounts and with the plants that are in her room. But they're quite emotionally distant, so she explores that as well. My walker and I ride in the thing, the revelatory elevator. I'm able to operate the buttons, which are big and bright, better than the buttons on my blouse. The elevator has a sign warning you not to use it if you are on fire. I am not on fire. I generally try to obey the rules. This book was amazing. I loved this book. This was a feels book for me. This was a real emotional, like, it just makes you feel things. Rose was so funny and so to the point. The wordplay in this book is so clever. And I think that Bruce Nash has really captured the way that Rose experiences dementia and how she feels that she's a burden, but also how she is trying to piece together her memory. I think he's captured that really well, and I felt that this book was so heartwarming and lovable, and I just flew through this. This was 316 pages of just I loved. I definitely recommend. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 because it was just lovely. And I loved Rose, and I would like to meet Rose and go hang out with her because she's hilarious. So that's it. That's where we're at. So we are currently now in the next phase of the reading challenge. So there will be another video to follow up on the books that I read for the new prompts that have come out for April to July. So there's 10 books in this one because it's our main meal. We've finished with the entree. The entree's done. We're on to the main. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I could sit and talk about books all day. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you very, very soon in the next one. Bye.